This week, Juliet Okafor from RevolutionCyber is with us to discuss fixing the enterprise user experience. Then Ryan Freed from Mandiant joins us to talk about zero-ish trust. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Secure Code Warrior raises $50 million to continue educating developers on best security practices. Jamf acquires DataJar. IronNet's public run ends soon. Microsoft puts pressure on other cybersecurity stocks. We discussed the Microsoft Storm breach. How to make engineers not hate you. Securely build features using AI APIs. Worm GPT. National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan. Cybersecurity labels. Google plans to scrape everything you post and use it for AI. Year of the Linux desktop. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy World Jump Day. This is episode 324, recorded on Thursday, July 20th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
I'm well, but I do not know what was it? National Jump Day? I don't know what that is.
World Jump Day.
World Jump Day. Okay.
Yeah, so I hadn't heard of it either, but they're encouraging people around the world to jump simultaneously. I think this kind of grew out of the idea that climate change is something that everybody needs to deal with, and like the combination of that and the old, question of like what would happen if everybody on the planet all jumped at the same time.
So is there a designated time we're all supposed to get up from our desks and jump?
I don't know. They didn't mention that in the write-up I was reading. So I use I think it's like National Day Calendar is the name of the website to pick these little daily things that I mentioned at the beginning of each of our podcasts. But yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think everybody jumping at the same time would change the Earth's orbit, and I think it's irrelevant anyway because, it's hard enough to synchronize clocks on computers, much less, have you ever been to a concert and everybody's supposed to clap at the same time? They can't even do that. A crowd of 300 people can't even get that right. Yeah, I don't see everybody managing to jump all at the same time. They're going to screw it up.
Well, that is perhaps true, but a couple of weeks ago I was at the movies, and one of those national weather alerts went off, and so everybody's phone went off at the same time. So there is some possibility for synchronization. Yeah. I guess you just have to have the possibility of flash flooding.
Now that said, we have a large football stadium here in Knoxville, Tennessee. The Neyland Stadium here at the University of Tennessee. There was a big game. I think it was some point last year. They said the celebrations. We beat some old rival. I don't follow it, but they said the celebrations from that win did register on Richter scales, on local Richter scales. Yeah.
Those are some pretty intense, football fans? Football.
Yeah, and that stadium holds over 100,000 people. So 100,000 people can shake the earth. But I don't think everybody jumping at once is going to change the Earth's orbit.
We'll never know because they didn't post the time.
Yeah, they didn't coordinate well. All right, a quick announcement real quick here. Security Weekly listeners, InfoSec World 2023 is heading back to Orlando, Florida. Join the InfoSec community at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort, September 23rd through 28th, 2023. Experience world-class learning and networking through enlightening keynotes, informative panel discussions, interactive breakout sessions, hands-on workshops, and summits, and more. As a Security Weekly community member, you're able to receive 20% off your InfoSec World 2023 tickets using code ISW23-SecWeek20. That's ISW23-SecWeek20. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023. All right, and today's topic is improving the enterprise security user experience, and we'll explain what that means here in a bit. But today we are talking to Juliet Okafor, CEO and founder of RevolutionCyber, which is a boutique security consultancy offering security culture as a service to midsize and enterprise companies. Jules is passionate about this, and I believe hitting at the heart of one of the biggest challenges with security in the enterprise, the intersection of people, process, and communication. Welcome, Jules.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, always fun to have you on. I think it's been a little bit since we had you on. We actually, I selected you for one of our Vault episodes. Every time we have a holiday, we don't do a new episode, and instead we take one of our favorites out of the Vault, and we feature that for the week. And we just had you featured a couple weeks ago, so it's great to have you on again for a second conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's. I think I actually I messed up my notes here. I pulled in the notes from our previous conversation. So so yeah, let's start with what do we mean when we say enterprise security user experience? And I love this kind of thing where we take kind of terms that are more associated with other industries, like user experience. UI and UX get used a lot in the product world and design world when designing software applications and things like that. But I find it really useful to use some of those concepts and ideas when talking about security programs and how they're organized. So maybe help us understand what you're talking about when you say security user experience.
Sure. So one of the things I like to remind security leaders, security professionals is I'll ask them a question about whether their program sucks, which is security user experience, whether they've incorporated that into the way they think about it. And the way to think about user experience is every time a person within an organization actually interacts with the security team or technology that is for the purpose of security, what is their feedback? How do they feel about it? And what does it ask them to do? Usually you should have, just like other parts of the organization, security, even if technology is being used, should be frictionless. But if there are multiple layers of security, oftentimes it means the user's experience with that security is wrought with delays and requests for information over and over again, the need to reset passwords. These are things that in the end result in people not making the right decisions because they present additional decisions that need to be made, but also additional work beyond what they were prepared to do.
And it seems like we've maybe come a long way with our ideas of how security should be handled internally inside a company. But it seems like we still have a lot of work to do there. There's still a lot of the I don't. Everybody calls the mindset something a little bit different, but like the Department of No is one thing that we hear a lot. But security's ever since it's become formalized and the CISO position has existed, leadership position has existed there. We've just been kind of experimenting with different things, trying to figure out what works, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I find that we often fall on the side of security is more important than how employees feel. So we disregard how it is that the person we're supposed to be serving actually feels about the way in which we're building out technology. And that's really what I find to be fallible, in that it causes, I argue that if you don't address user experience, actually you are increasing risk, because human beings will go around it, right? Or go under it if they have to. So I think it's just now that people are starting to want to have this conversation. When I first started it 4 years ago, people thought I was crazy, or just, didn't have enough technical knowledge to know better. But a lot of people are coming around now.
Right.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think? Because there are a lot of other departments within organizations, and they don't necessarily put what they're doing. Like finance doesn't put the finance systems before the people. It's all about getting people paid. HR doesn't put the HR systems before the people. It's about serving the employees in the company. Why do you think the security department sort of sticks to its guns and it's like, all right, we need to focus on the tech. We don't need to focus on the people using the tech, because tech itself isn't ever going to run, despite what AI is promising. You still need people behind the tech. So why do you think this has happened? What has led to this?
I think finance and HR and legal have had years, generations of time before to figure a lot of this out. If we think about how young security is, it's still about 20, no more than about 30 years where really people were considering security as critical to an organization's either risk tolerance or part of board discussions. So I like to assign a lot of this thinking to just the novelty of security. But I think when we've had to come to terms with the fact that what we're doing isn't working is because the breaches aren't stopping. So we can continue to think additional layers of security is enough, or we have to start to really think about the human layer. And then we also need to say, if we're dealing with humans and they have the ability to indicate what does and doesn't work, I believe it's time to listen. And I think more and more security professionals are just listening. And then security vendors are building some of that feedback into the technology they're building.
Yeah, and so we mentioned when I went through your bio, RevolutionCyber focuses on security culture as a service. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit, about what you do for companies, like what you're focused on when you come into a company. You already mentioned some of the questions that you ask when you come in, does your program suck, right? Like what is the But and I'm sure you ask different people that question, right? Like the answer inside security, is probably very different from outside, right? And maybe the people inside security, they don't know how they're viewed by other people in the org, and maybe they should. So what is security culture as a service? What are you doing when you work with these companies?
It really is checking the temperature for how security is viewed across the enterprise. So beyond just employees, how security stakeholders think about security, how the leadership actually communicates about security across the organization, and then really what communication is going through the organization about what's important and how people should behave. I often discover that, to your point, Adrian, there's a huge discrepancy between the way security views its perception of itself and how the organization perceives it. So when I created security culture as a service, one thing I wanted to be clear about is we do have a technology, but we are focused on the service pieces because that human aspect is so critical to the work we do. But I often find if an organization has decided to bring us in, they're getting complaints from their senior leadership team. In fact, there is a popular platform that is used by everyone, and literally the president of the company, and I think this was a kind of a larger mid-size, probably about 5,000 to 7,500 employees. And the president said, if I see one more email that's a phishing email, I'm going to lose it. You're going to get fired. And that is not when you decide to make a change. There must have been murmurings before or things that were being said about how bad that experience was, but it's ignored because we haven't had a breach, right? Like the line that I hear all the time is, well, at least we're protecting them because we haven't had a breach.
Right.
Okay, well, what if you never have a breach? Do we have to suffer for it? So I find when an organization brings us in, what they're saying is we have to integrate what we're providing to our employee base as sort of feature sets, benefits, with the way in which they view what it is that we're doing, so that the outcome is an overall better experience and people want to hear from security and we're able to influence them to drive big change. That's why people use, RC's security culture as a service.
And, something I hate, have we had a breach as a metric, right? Because if somebody's really determined to get into a company, they're going to get into the company. Like I've seen organizations with great security programs, but they're highly visible. There are a lot of reasons they're being targeted, and they have breaches anyway, versus companies that never have a breach that just, they're sitting there thinking we must be amazing because we haven't had a breach, but they're just not very visible. Nobody cares about them. They're just not that interesting as a company. So they either just do luck or statistical, just being one of millions of companies that could be breached. They don't get breached. So what metrics should companies? Well, first of all, I want to, do you encourage people to not use that as a metric? And if not, what metrics should they be using to measure the effectiveness of their program?
The best measure, the best experiences that I've had with an organization is after a breach. After a major breach, one, everyone wants to do the thing you say because they want it to stop. Two, we often find that they are much more willing to listen and collaborate with other groups who have been saying what it is that needs to happen in order for them not to feel the pain of what security is. But what I would say is there are some little known metrics that I ask board members and like non-technical leaders to think about when they think about either security culture or user experience. One is how the help desk handles security tickets. A lot of times, what we find if we do when we do data analysis of help desk security tickets, that the security tickets spend the longest amount of time in the sort of hopper to be resolved, primarily because small security team, they need, it's first in, first out, and they need easy answers. And security often doesn't have the easy answer. And usually a security response requires multiple places in which to gather data. So for the security person, the user experience is bad, and therefore the help desk professional, they are impacted, and then the employee never gets an answer. So you want to measure what is the timeline between when a help desk ticket around security is open and when that help desk ticket is closed. The second one I would say is your MTTR, meaning your mean time to response. So I tell people the best way to tell if your culture or if your users are actually, and let's say stakeholders, are actually on board and really feel close to you is how long it takes them to get involved if there is a critical security incident. And over time, with better user experience, you'll see that time to response drop because you'll see integration of processes, you'll see automation built in, you'll see embedding of security in policies. And so people are much more aware and enabled to do the right thing quicker. And also the stakeholders are reaching out to you in order to see how they can help. So that's another ticket, another way to measure. The third one would be reporting. So are people coming to the security team to say, here's what I saw? Because it doesn't matter how much you invest in professionals, there is no way the security team can keep up with the number of threats, attack systems, and then people. So you want to have everyone on the front line coming to you to say, hey, this has happened. It seems weird to me based on what you've taught me, and I'd like you to look into it. So there should be the creation of help desk tickets, but that it should be reduced over time, because then you're also going out to provide them that information. And then I would say, finally, it's also important to see the amount of investment per employee in security. So you can tell very quickly with user experience if people are just investing in the traditional security technology. But when we see investments in identity systems, if there's a high identity investment, that tends to be a correlation to how user experience is happening, because one, if you're consumer facing, you're reducing how long it takes for them to get access to your products or services. And then two, internally, you can verify much more quickly if people are who they say they are without really long passwords and multiple hops to get into the same system. So if you're doing security properly, these should already be built in, and you can tell not by the security team and what they say, but all the interactions they have across the organization over time.
So a lot of process metrics there, but there's another side of it, right? Like you're talking about security leaders needing to listen, and there's the whole culture side of it, where you have like you could have somebody in a security leadership position that's technically perfect at everything. Like the metrics are great, but still everybody who works with them just wishes they would get hit by a bus, or maybe something less violent, like leave the company or something like that.
Yeah.
But like how do we do we measure that aspect as well? And honestly, it's more than just. Well, I mean, part of the importance of that culture is you got to work with other people to have an effective program, right? You got to have good rapport. People have to want to give you the data that you need access to. Yes. And if you're pissing everybody off, I mean, that's a huge challenge to get data, to get the things your team needs, to get other parts of the company on board with the program and the things you're trying to do with your program to reduce risk and make the company more secure. So when we were prepping for this interview earlier this morning, I loved you brought up Net Promoter Score, and kind of like, I think we were joking, but then, should we actually measure sentiment, like how the security team is viewed within the organization? Should that be something that's tracked?
Yeah, so I talk a lot about the security Net Promoter Scores, and security often believes some of the basic principles of marketing as fluff. And that is flawed, and it is a mistake. And here's why. We talk a lot about security as being a change agent. Really, the best security programs are actually impacting the culture of the larger organization. So if the leader is not well liked and people don't want to collaborate, it becomes very difficult to drive the change necessary to actually see the security outcomes. So it's not important just to, if you were to use a Net Promoter Score, which is, what is that net feeling, sentiment about the security program across the organization? If you're consistently measuring that really before you need people in the hopes of creating great political capital, and I tell people this, security CISO roles, they are political positions. They are about getting out and shaking hands and kissing babies. It is about having lunch conversations. And I call it the listening tour, going around and listening to people. And the Net Promoter Score, what that does, if you're consistently measuring it, it goes, why is it, do people want to work with the security team? What do people feel about the security team? And do they believe that the security team is capable of doing the job that they do? Now, we have an assessment that we do that is proprietary to us. We call it the Mindshare model. And it's this idea that the more times you can get employees to think about security as a part of their day, the better it is for the security program and the likely they are to actually engage in the secure behaviors you're seeking. The Net Promoter Score is a part of that, in that the more positively we can get the security team viewed, the more likely that what they're giving out as advice will be respected and taken, and then the behaviors adopted. I'm always talking to CISOs about this idea of the business CISO. And then I talk about the 3 levels of a CISO, which is a builder, the transformer, and the maintainer. If you're a building CISO or a transforming CISO, it requires that you adopt this position of security leader as coach, right? So you can't coach someone if you don't have a basic understanding of what motivates them. And you really can't coach someone if they don't like you. So you have to, of course, adapt some ways in which to tell that not only do I want to help you, but you want to help me help you. And that's the way that I believe we're going to get much more security outcomes with regard to identity. So then we can go into the deep technical. Without that first layer of, do people even like you? You can't get very far. Most times we see technology sitting in a box on the ground because the security leader has no idea how to get engineering to slow, one of their agile sprints in order to get something done. They have no idea how to get the business unit to patch a system. They have no idea how to get HR to embed security training at the beginning of their onboarding process. If you can't do those things, you're not even doing your job. So we've just got to shift the way we think about this culturally.
It's great to hear you talk about all this, and there's so much that goes into it, and it's very interpersonal, even though a lot of the time people think any kind of technology, and certainly security falls into that pretty heavily, it's about the tech, it's about what the tech can do, but it's a really good interpersonal relationship that helps this. So my question is, when you see companies, or when you're working with companies that are a little more mature, that are doing well at this, whether you've been coaching them for a while or whether you're just starting to work with them, are there certain types of people that excel at this? And then are there certain types of companies, whether it's by geography or by industry, that also seem to be a little farther along this path to adopting this mindset of security culture?
Yes. Those are great questions. First, the companies that are doing it well tend to be in the consumer products, consumer-facing tech software companies, and then financial services. So fintech, health tech. Those are companies from really, they're more mature because they have to be, but they tend to have a great deal of focus on reputational risk. And that if they don't have positive consumer feedback, it immediately affects the value of the company. So in those spaces, I've seen these kinds of companies become really good about integrating security, automating it, and scaling security across the organization. But what I would say is, and I want people to hear me say this over and over again, cybersecurity is an art and it is a science, but it is in fact an art first. It's an art in the way graphic design, software development is, in that there's a creativity in order to get cybersecurity, in order for it to become what it is. Because if you think about it, a cybersecurity system is really a combination of multiple things. But the effectiveness is in how you combine the things, which gives you a lot of wiggle room for, aligning with what the risk is of the tolerance of the organization, the industry, the geographical location. So there is no one way to do it well. So the best people who understand that from the beginning have liberal arts degrees. I've met so many people who have been in music. I hired our platform designer. She was in fashion. I also have met and bring onto my team psychologists and sociologists who have an intrinsic understanding of how people work. And those are the people that are missing in the cybersecurity conversation. We need to have more of those people at the forefront, giving their opinions and really challenging the way we've traditionally always done security.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. I have to ask you then, especially as a woman in security, a woman executive in security, and a person of color in security, how did you get here? How did you start? What keeps you? What motivates you?
Oh my gosh. So I always tell people I found my first role on Craigslist. And ultimately, it was a job asking for a salesperson. I'd been in sales over 20 years. And I just said, okay, well, I can sell anything. I'm pretty good at that. I'll try this. And I went to apply for this job at an MSSP. I told them I would be this huge thought leader in 3 to 5 years, and they laughed in my face. But they gave me the job. And the one thing that I can say I did, and I'm an attorney as well. So what being a lawyer teaches you is how to think and how to take facts quickly and apply them to scenarios. I mean, that's what lawyers are taught to do in front of juries. And I went to Temple University. That's one of the things that they taught us very well is you have a fact pattern, you have a number of different sort of rules and laws and policies. What's the best story you could tell a jury in order to get them to side with you? And that's really, if I think about where my success is in security, that's what it's been. And I tell this to security people, I could train anybody to get into security, and I have. I've created an apprenticeship program and gotten lots of women into the space, and they've gone on to join audit firms, to move into pen testing, because it's a mindset. And once you have the mindset of curiosity, and like I did, you sit in a SOC and you just ask questions that annoy them to no end because you've got an endless set of questions you want to know, you can learn this too. And that's what I try to tell people. Like, I learned it, and so can you.
It's like a 2-year-old mindset. But why? But why? But why?
Yes. I like to do it. I didn't like when my 2-year-old used to do it to me. It's like, because I said so, which is what I used to get all the time. That's the way it is. We are the worst industry for regurgitating bad habits and then building them into products. That's what we do over and over again.
So in that vein, how do you set these organizations you work with up for success? Like after you leave, like I assume these are not well, I don't know. You tell me. You know, do you work with some of these organizations indefinitely? Do you are these programs like a certain amount of time, and you're giving them things to do to improve the culture and helping them redo processes and the way they think about things and do things? Like how do you ensure that they're not just going to revert back to bad behaviors and bad habits after you leave?
Yeah, so there are a few things we do. So let me step back. So when we first started the company, we had this whole 3-year approach. And what we decided was in year 1, we'd go completely out and we'd build all the structures out, and then they'd be able to replace us with someone. The new person would come in and they'd have all these templates and everything ready. And what would happen is that we were basically setting ourselves up to be fired. And we thought that was the best outcome we could have because we'd done our job. But the issue is, if you don't have the continued presence, what happens is they bring someone else in, things fall to the side, people make new decisions, and then you go back at a higher cost because now you've got to relearn the thing, build things back up, and it's harder to rebuild than it is to start to build from the start. But then secondly, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say 3 years. You're talking, that's at least 2 or 3 CISOs that are going to be there across like the time you're working with them, right?
Well, I got my start actually in working with utility companies, and what you're trying to do is actually build a capability. So it is a CapEx purchase. So for 3 years to 5 years, what you're doing is saying, you don't have the ability now to design wonderful, delightful user experiences. And so what we want to do is build a roadmap, just like people do when they're going into the cloud. You don't immediately just take your stuff and put it in there. You have a plan of action for how you want to deliver in year 1. Here's our goals. Here's our quick wins. And then here's how we enable those things to keep happening manually. Now, the maturity of our program came in the automation. Now we actually integrate a lot of our technology, and we've built a platform internally to integrate into Jira, and we can integrate into Teams and Slack. And now we have the ability to communicate across the organization so that if they can't afford to have the labor, which is the most expensive part, they can continue to use the structure we've built. And because we've got piping, we kind of demand that they continue to do it the way that we structured it. So that was a change in the way we delivered our services.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's I imagine that's something you continually adjust as you have those experiences. Like a utility is going to be very different from a lot of other kinds of organizations, I imagine, in terms of both the culture and the structure.
Yes, and it's it's customized to size. So we also used to do completely custom everything, but we now know, given all the work we've done this for about 60 programs now, what companies need based on a number of sources of information that we gather, and we'll design it based on what we know is best practice for that company at that size, in that industry. Like you said, it's more art than science, right? So you got to customize it. Yeah. Always painting with the brush. I think security, if we thought about it that way, we'd know like the way in which even security technology is being sold, it isn't truly adaptable even. Security technology is typically asking us as the enterprise to adapt to it. But it's great to find partners who go, well, you exist, your business is the important focus, we're going to adjust to you. And that's a shift that I think the entire industry needs to start to make. So speaking of customizing it and handling it different based on context and what's going on with the company, do you find it easier? Is the company and the culture more pliable? Are they more likely to listen after a breach, or like how do they? Is that how they find you a lot of times? Like yes. They have an incident or something like that, and they're kind of rethinking how they handle security and thinking, well, we need to bring somebody in here to change things up and help us improve how we approach this. So I guess kind of two questions in there, like how, are people finding you as the result of an incident like a breach, and is it different? Is it easier to work with them right after one of those incidents versus somebody who's never had an incident, for example? It's easier to work with people who've had an incident because now they're much more open with regard to what it is that they will, they're responding, and they're much more reactive. So having my company with an attorney at the helm who's done this a while, who can calm some of the fears and then set a plan is critical. What I often find is we don't get to dictate how our customers find us. All we do is put out the messaging and allow really a great word of mouth campaign, lots of great referrals and partners and friends to tell others that, we have these great experiences. We'd love for you to reach out to them because they've helped us and they can help you. But what we also see over and over again is that incidents and breaches reveal a ton about security culture and the user experience. So imagine a scenario where you have sort of a decision tree automated into technology. The stakeholders have been trained on everything. Every employee knows exactly what to do if they receive, let's just say, a special word or a special email from a person. Even though you've made it so that the culture is positive beforehand, it's ready for you when the breach happens. But too often, because it's still mentality that we won't be breached, even though people say it's a matter of when, most people don't believe it'll happen to them until it does. So at that point, we're charging double and triple because you had the proposal in your email box and you chose not to do anything with it, because then we've got to get ahead of the hackers. Now it's a race against time. I'm always trying to align people on this idea that if you think about your employees before you actually need them, they will reward you by thinking about you when you actually do. So you want to start to build out the structure of things. And then when the incident happens, it's your reward. How the incident occurs and how it's handled is your reward for having done the good thing ahead of time. Right. Yeah, so, maybe diving into that example a little bit, because incidents, breaches are such a big component in how security programs get built, how, companies find the momentum to change things. What are some of the things that you see, like what are some of the big issues that you see when somebody's actually in an incident? Working an incident, that you have to go in and correct? Yeah. One, I am totally astounded by how bad third-party SOCs are. And I cut my teeth in the SOC, so I've known for at least 9 years that they can be pretty bad. But I find over and over again that the SOC's context, so providing not just an alert, but a an actual context for why this is critical, why this is high, and what is it that should be done rarely exists, especially as you get to mid-size and smaller. They're just sending alerts over the fence and hoping that someone does something with them. So there's not a lot of great triaging and also contextual alerts about what's actually happening. We also see quite a bit of a breakdown in communication. So oftentimes, the leader doesn't have a trigger for when they need to reach out to parties outside of the security organization, or everyone on the team thinks everyone else got it, right? So they don't have a first, second, third base sort of strategy. It's everyone's running around helter-skelter trying to figure out who's going to take the lead on it. And that's a horrible time to figure that out. And then also find there's either over communication or under. So who needs to know what at what time? Even like stakeholders, there are certain points in which you communicate information. Sometimes there's too much shared, which creates legal liability. Because if there is a customer requirement, if there is a compliance requirement, and now we've shared with an employee. In fact, one of my clients actually had a situation where their someone who'd been notified about a potential breach notified their customer first before they even told the CISO. And this is not something that's like surprising. It happens more than you would think. Or
the third party did?
The employee told the third party.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Because they wanted, and this is all done with, with grace and stewardship. They're like, oh my God, something bad's happened. So we don't get in trouble, I'm going to go tell the customer so they don't worry. But that's the worst thing to happen. So you have to, within an incident, have a controlled way by which you make sure you're allaying fears, communicating authority, communicating to the right stakeholders, and that you're actually going through a process in which it's documented and it's auditable. Because if it does turn into something in which you could potentially have lawsuits or some regulatory penalty, you want to be able to show that you actually went through. And all of these things are cultural considerations. Who knows what, when is a cultural consideration. Yes, it impacts security, but that's why culture is always so critical. And even that, how you deal with your employees becomes critical.
Yeah, legal probably wasn't too happy with that employee telling the third party about the breach.
Not at all. Not at all.
All right. Yeah. So what's the, obviously an incident response plan, the problem I always had with an incident response plan is it often isn't in a form that's useful during the incident, some, even if it's like a fairly short, like 7 to 13 page plan, that's, that's kind of unwieldy to look through when you're doing it. So do you find, what helps teams prepare for this, especially with the communications? Are you recommending lots of, or running lots of tabletops, doing more live fire simulations, that kind of thing? How do people get better at this without having to practice during the actual incident, right?
The IR plans, I think too many people use the pages of an IR plan as some sort of gospel or something that they should base everything on. I think, there's a difference in even the way we interact with things that are written down versus when they're either told to us or we're experiencing them. So the idea is, how do I take this IR plan and transform it into an experience in which people can actively participate and we can all agree on the right way to go about something? So safety companies and teams, they have this down. So if you're in a company that has a safety department, go to them. They have thought through this much longer than we have on the security side. Right. But I also want to walk away from this idea of what we call tabletops, because the term tabletop is military driven. That's where a lot of these terminologies come from. And business leaders don't think of these things as tabletops. They think of them as real life scenario planning, emergency response planning. There are much more better business language in order to discuss them. But to your point, yes, it is a simulation of what could be or had been a real event. And then you're having everyone practice what in their role, in their title, given their location, what their actual response should be. And what you're doing is you're having them do that over and over again. So it's like muscle memory. They remember it even without thinking, because you want people to not think about it, because in incidents, the shock makes people paralyzed. They don't act.
Right.
But if they've practiced a number of times, they at least go to what they remember versus what they think in that moment, which is purely based on panic.
Right. I've seen just super basic stuff get caught, when testing stuff like that, realizing nobody actually knows Katie's mobile phone number, right? If Katie's not on Slack, we have no idea how to get a hold of her. Sorry, Katie.
Who is she? Where did she go? Well, that's a really interesting point, and I was thinking this as you were speaking about it. Have those IR plans changed, or the approach to them, has that changed in the last 3 or so years, given our now corporate working structure? Because a lot of the time you just don't have everybody in a same location. So has that changed at all? Has that changed how you recommend people build their strategies and handle things, whether it's an incident or even just a deployment or rollout of a technology? Has that shifted at all?
It depends. So there is much more of a shift from compliance-focused security to security as an enabler, and this idea of security that is by design, meaning you think about security as a part of every decision you're making, as part of any risk management decision. So the theory behind IR plans have changed. The issue is there is a compliance requirement that it be written down, but those same people aren't then taking it and practicing with them. So that is typically the gap. We are seeing an influx or an increase in the number of IR companies that exist. The issue with them is that they're on retainer, have very little knowledge of the organization. So there may be a plan, but they don't know how to action it because they're not actually practitioners in the environment on a day-to-day basis. But there's more conversation about the fact that this should happen. Is it happening? No, not that I've experienced in the work that I've done, except for parts of companies in really large organizations where there are either sensitive data or the reputational risk would be so huge that they have to put something like this in place and continue to test against it.
All right. And we need to go ahead and wrap up the conversation here. So maybe, just a few bullet point conclusions, Jules, on what people should be focusing on, aside from talking to you directly. How do we stop this cycle of turning bad habits into products and processes?
Yes. So I think let's go back to security, user experience. Like, you want to make sure your program doesn't suck, and that's important in terms of ensuring that each of your employees has as limited friction in your organization as possible when they're interacting with technology or engaging in digital experience. Secondly, you want to make sure that you understand what your culture is. Security culture exists even if you can't see it. So you have to understand what are the perception, behavior, moods, and customs that are occurring when the security team actually isn't even looking. And third, incidents reveal security culture. So you don't want to wait until an incident to understand the former 2 points. But what's important to note is the way in which you communicate across the organization prior to an incident helps to build capital so that when it's time for an incident, you can more quickly respond. And so your mean time to response is reduced because you've thought through each step in that process. And fourth, process matters. You can't just buy technology and you can't ignore your people. The bridge will always be those processes that tie the two together.
Jules, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. As always, this has been a blast.
Thank you so much.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk Zero-ish Trust with Ryan Freed from Mandiant. Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Fortra helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements even further by pairing with our additional red teaming tools from Cobalt Strike and Outflank. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra Core Security. Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day invitation-only executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We are pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you use code SECWEEK23 to register. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. All right, for this interview, Ryan Freed joins us today to talk about zero-ish trust. Ryan has over 10 years of experience in IT security and has been teaching security at a community college for the last 8 years. Most recently, Ryan has been leading SOAR, purple teaming, network segmentation, DevSecOps, and CSPM initiatives, and he recently started a new role at Mandiant. Congratulations, Ryan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy to be over on the cybersecurity side.
Yeah, now, and probably important to say you're not representing Mandiant here today. I'm not sure if you've even started that job yet.
Yeah, no, that is correct. This is my second week at Mandiant. A lot of this stuff I'll be talking about will be from my previous two companies. So yeah, more focused on previous experience.
Right, and that is the theme this quarter. You know, we're focusing a lot on practitioner perspective this quarter, and this is right along. Right in line with that. So yeah, let's jump into it. You know, we've had you on here a number of times before, but I don't think we've ever talked network segmentation or zero trust. So why zero-ish? Why are we putting the ish on zero trust there?
Yeah, zero trust really is a journey, something that not many companies, if any, will fully achieve. And zero trust can mean a lot of things. In my companies, I've used it as more of a principle. And while zero trust has been a huge buzzword for the last couple of years, really it comes down to least privilege, like we've been talking about, and like you learn, you know, with CISSP and security fundamentals. So I really wanted to focus on one specific part of zero trust that in my last two companies I was tasked with, and as a best practice, you know, for ransomware mitigation, how we approached it, how it really scared me at first, and took a risk-based approach, and ultimately were not only successful from a security perspective, but I argue just as importantly from an availability perspective, resulted in zero downtime for production applications.
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot to break down there, right? You know, imagine so you know, just for context, like how long did it take you? You know, and is it was it something where you were able to implement it in phases? You know, where you're pushing stuff to production, or you know, did you try to get everything going all at once?
Yeah, we definitely approached it in phases, and just to clarify, we didn't achieve zero trust, at all. We achieved, like we talked about, the zero-ish trust. So it took anywhere from between 6 months to a year. The first time I had to do it definitely took longer. Luckily, we had some really good relationships with our business IT owners, the people responsible for those applications. But we walked before we ran. So we did it with some of our own applications, tested it, made sure it worked, and really built up to our most critical applications that can handle the least amount of downtime. And we're basically prove that it worked amongst other applications, how diligent we're being, how data driven, we're not just guessing, in order to make our team successful and then make sure the other team can still do their job.
Right. So you selected some test groups. You created some test groups and test applications, basically, that were non-critical to the business, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And I think a really important thing, which I'm sure we'll dig into, is choosing what segments you're looking to do zero-ish trust with. When my boss first asked me to start looking at zero trust, the first thing I thought about was server-to-server communication. And that's really impactful when it comes to an availability perspective. But when you think about it from a threat actor, I'm most likely a user was phished, so they're most likely going to start on a user machine. And then from there, we want to be able to contain and really limit what that person can access. When you think about a standard company, you might have, 5 or 10% of those people in IT, in my experience. So most people don't need to RDP to other machines or SSH or remotely connect. And let's say we accidentally block traffic from a user to a server. That's probably not going to result in production downtime. That's probably going to result in someone being a little frustrated and not able to do their job, which executives are not going to hear about. That's somewhere, where I do my best to fix it right away. So, you get the best bang for your buck, which is something I'm always thinking about, of not impacting availability, and you're taking a risk-based or a threat-based approach for where you're starting and what you're protecting.
So what are some of the core components here? Like when we say zero trust, I think, either some people think of a very specific reference architecture, or some people's minds just kind of, turn into jelly. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on in people's heads. So maybe help us out a little bit there. Like what components we're putting together here. Like I would guess that there's some network segmentation, but you also have to really understand, have good access controls for your employees, right? For really understand identities and understand who needs what.
Right. It really is a defense in depth approach. From an access perspective, really limiting the amount of domain administrators that you have, having really good tracking and logging for that. But like we talked about, least privilege, that's nothing new to anybody. I don't know that I'm referring to a specific architecture, but part of security's job is to continually have people validate, do you need that level of access? And that also goes into Azure, AWS, and public cloud. I've seen companies that will limit the domain administrators and be like, yep, we're good. But then we see 15 global admins in Azure, which is essentially the same access, or root level type access in AWS. So you really have to properly scope your zero trust when it comes to identity. And then from a network perspective, like your previous guest was talking about, it requires you to know your network and know what normal traffic is. So an example that comes to mind is, should you allow SQL connections from a workstation to a production database? Ideally not. That's just something where if a threat actor gets control of a workstation, now they potentially can have access to your production database. So scrutinizing that and then negotiating with the different people in IT to ask, well, can you do that from a jump box? So we have further protection, maybe two-factor authentication. So it's really, you're never going to get to zero. Like I'll give an example. There's a production application I've worked with in the past, and the vendor said we need ports 1 through 65,000, whatever, TCP open. And they gave it to them, years ago. But through a tool like this, I can actually look at the communication over the course of a month and say, well, you actually only use the range of about 1,000 ports. So we're going to limit that. So we're reducing our attack surface potentially by, 64,000 ports. Can we get down closer to 500 ports? Sure. But that's where the zero-ish trust comes, because you're never going to get down to a 100% secure. most companies aren't in business to be secure, right? They're trying to make money through the product or service. So, but if I can reduce the attack surface, and if someone gets infected, but the user on the workstation can't really get into anything, we can wipe that and move on with our day, rather than someone be able to try to do SMB connections to our whole network, pass the hash with credentials and all these other things. So we're trying to make our day a little bit easier.
In terms of, I'm sorry, go ahead, Adrian.
No, I was just verbally nodding. Go ahead.
Okay. In terms of the attack surface, so you talk about it, you talk about zero-ish trust. I understand why you use that phraseology, but what are some good metrics for organizations? Because everybody talks about zero trust as a journey. Everybody talks about achieving zero trust, but how it has to be, a stepwise process. You can't do everything all at once. When it comes to attack surface, it's really hard to quantify, right? Because it's always going to be changing, shifting, and in some cases growing. What are some metrics? What are some examples that you can give to people so that they can understand how zero trust contributes to attack surface reduction, contributes to X? What's the X, and how do people get there?
That's a great question. I think you can do it from both a qualitative and quantitative perspective. When I think about qualitative, I think about having a penetration test months prior to our zero-ish trust, and then either you have them retest or you use another vendor or do another penetration test however many months after. And I like to tell my boss of, this is stuff that they would have been able to do before, or as you read the report, they were able to move laterally, but after implementing some of these controls, they weren't able to. So that's more of qualitative, because you have to be familiar with your security controls and such. From a quantitative perspective, I would look at the reduction of the amount of allowed ports, like I talked about with that application. And then if you want to get even more granular, you can talk about reduction of ports that are generally used by threat actors. So I think about insecure protocols like FTP, Telnet, and then you have SSH, RDP, SMB. Having an informed approach to say, we were able to reduce those allowed connections to X percentage of our server fleet, because it will be needed for certain areas, but probably only to jump boxes, not directly to servers. That's how we would normally report out on it.
So that's a great metric for technical teams. How do you broaden that scope for business teams, for the executive team, for the board of directors? Because you're talking about ports, right? And that's great. All of us on this call, probably everybody listening, gets that conceptually. But you're talking to a CEO of, we were talking with Jules about, a lot of her retail companies. CEO of a retail company is maybe going to get it, or sort of kind of gets it. How do you translate the, hey, we're closing these ports, this is what it means, in a meaningful way that affects the business strategy and even some of the business operations?
Sure. I think hopefully something you continue to report is that it didn't have an effect on availability of your applications. But when I think about reporting to the board, to abstract the technical jargon, I think about either using real life scenarios that you've read in the news where attackers, and hopefully attackers that have attacked people in your industry, to say we could have mitigated that damage based on our controls. Or you can talk about your penetration test from a really high level to say, they used to be able to do this, they're emulating adversaries, we implemented zero-ish trust, they were no longer able to do it, they were less successful than the year previously. Or if you have an actual incident, never waste that opportunity to say, if you're able to contain it sooner, let the executives know that some of the initiatives that you're doing had a real impact and made the outcome much more successful than if you didn't implement that.
So let me tie this back. I know you heard a little bit of our last guest, and she was talking about security culture and usability and user friendliness, even to a degree of security being that consultant and that listener to the to the business, working with those people. So when you're talking about zero trust, it's almost this negative connotation, right? It's like zero trust, and people are going to think, oh, they don't trust us. But you need to give people access. Zero trust in theory helps with that. But how do you explain this that makes people feel like it's helping them in their jobs? Because theoretically, if you're helping someone who's not a security person, not a tech person, in their role, do their job better, faster, easier, when the time comes, just like Jules was talking about, they're going to be a better advocate, a better help for you. They're not going to do something that goes against some of the security things that you want or need them to do in a culture of security.
Yeah, I would put this as a threefold answer. I think the first one is you need to have a really fast response when things are blocked when they shouldn't have been. I create alerts and would reach out to specific users to say, hey, I know this is how you did it before, but the new protocol is actually to go through a jump box and such. Because I think 10 to 15 years ago, security would just saw the alert and then wouldn't have done anything about it. But I think it's really important to, especially early on, react quickly, reach out to the user. They're stuck in their habits. They've done something, the same way for years. And, changing that habit is hard. So having that really quick communication with them is important. I think the second point is, while this might not make their job faster, easier, I think in my experience in the last few companies, people latch on to making the company more secure. You want to make sure that their application could do what they want. But I kind of feel that security culture, like they talked about, maybe you can't see it, but I think there is something about being part of that bigger picture and doing their part on top of their main job responsibilities to help make the company more secure.
They take some
third
pride
part,
in
I
it?
would say. Sorry, go ahead.
They take some pride in it. It sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it takes a little bit of explanation to understand why they're doing it. I'll give some explanations of things that I've read about or we've seen at the company and explain this is important because if someone does get phished, and it will happen, we'll be able to minimize the impact that could have. So they know, obviously you want them to keep on high alert for phishing emails, but we're doing something to help better protect the entire company. So sometimes it's helpful to talk about some examples. But I think the third thing, and probably the hardest part of zero trust for me, is talking to those business owners or IT owners of these critical applications, being able to look them in the eye and say, I've done 3 months worth of research. This is what I've seen. I am very confident that this will not have a production impact. I think that's part of what they want to hear, because at the end of the day, that's what their bonus and everything is tied towards, for them to be able to do their job. And we want to enable them, not be in their way.
Right. So with any of this, how do you? I guess part of it is you do run out to the test groups. How much do you? Is this like 2 steps forward, 1 step back? You know what I'm saying? Where you have to experiment with things, and maybe something you think might have worked well doesn't, or even the flip side of that, something you weren't expecting to be all that impressive put into place, maybe stops an actual attack or something like that. How much of this did you just have to kind of feel out as you went? I guess another way of asking this is, in the end stages, how much did your implementation resemble the original plan?
Yeah, I think it was pretty close, at least for the first part of it. Like I said, originally we were looking for things like server-to-server communication, server communication going outbound, and looking at allow listing for certain domains. So I think the scope was larger in both projects that I started. But then when we started to look at what the impact can be on applications, compared to the reward and the risk reduction that we're doing, things changed. And that's why we looked at for things like server, workstation to workstation, workstation to server, rather than doing some of the more impactful ones that may be less likely compared to those other two scenarios.
Yeah. So, yeah. So the new job with Mandiant. Kind of interested in what you're going to be jumping into there, or is there more that we haven't covered with the zero trust conversation here before I move on that you wanted to cover?
I think overall, if I had to tie everything together, it's not an all or nothing type journey. Anything helps. And, I think access, microsegmentation are really important things. And anything you can do to reduce that attack surface is important. I think you just need to walk before you crawl and go from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think this kind of dovetails with what we're talking about here, and part of what we talked about with Jules, and we actually have some interviews where we're going to be talking about this again next week, where, I think when I look at how breaches occur, how companies get attacked, the points at which they fail, I consistently just see it coming back to processes that aren't tested, that don't work. Things that aren't configured correctly, just all these controls that get put into place, but nobody thinks to actually test them, right? Like we hear all these stories about, the MSSP puts in some kind of IDS or some kind of monitoring appliance, into a company, or they get a feed of data, and 3 years later you find out they can't see the network traffic that they're supposed to be seeing, or the data is not actually flowing, and nobody tested it, nobody noticed. So, I think when we were talking about this interview on the prep call, we were talking about control validation, and how do we ensure that these controls work the way that they're expected to. And in my past, I know, one of the services my startup provided was very similar to this, where we would go in and, somebody would purchase a certain amount of time every month, and we just log into their stuff and look for mistakes, and help configure things better, ensure things were actually working the way that they were intended to work. So what is that going to be like for you? And have you seen similar things? So I'm kind of curious about that as well. This experience I've had, these are just my personal anecdotes. I think you've seen more of the enterprise side than I have. So, curious about your thoughts on it.
Yeah, that really dovetails well into my new role at Mandiant. So my role is around control validation, and it'll be twofold. It'll be using attack simulation type tools, similar to Attack IQ or Simulate or Mandiant security validation, and it's running those tools against not just one server, but all different types of devices. A workstation that's on VPN versus off VPN in the office, because that results in different security based on what network they're on. Doing that against a Windows server, a Linux server. I think a Linux server is really eye-opening because EDR vendors really haven't caught up. So while your whole Windows fleet might be really well protected by your EDR, you can exploit a Linux server. So different things like that. So you can do it from like a red team type perspective, where a lot of these tools will look at the latest adversaries and run those against your technology. So, maybe you thought your EDR would alert against the new domain administrator being added, but maybe it didn't. That's a good way to validate it. Or different recon type commands like NL trust to see what domain trusts there are, or certutil to see what your CA server is, or who are the domain admins. Little things like that aren't typically run. And then the other part of my job will be doing kind of what you talked about so you say you update your content signatures for your EDR vendor, as soon as they're available. Can you show me that? So then I can actually take a look and see if that is best practice or if there's different settings that you can do. So that's more of like the blue team control validation perspective.
Right. There's tons of stuff that people assume are working a certain way in their organization, that aren't actually working that way. Like that was back when I was a PCI QSA, something that was wisely built into the process. It wasn't an actual requirement, but it said, before you even start going through the requirements, you've got to look at a data flow diagram and see if the data actually exists within the enclave that they say they've contained it within, or if you find it outside, the cardholder DMZ or whatever that form that enclave takes, VPC, whatever it might be. And yeah, 100% of the time you'd find the data outside that, and then going back to my consulting work again, we used to test MSSPs, companies, third-party security monitoring services. And 100% of the time, they failed to detect any of the attack simulation that we did. So that was, that was kind of a revelation to me. And we just heard that. We just heard that from Jules in the previous conversation. She said, even when they send stuff over, it doesn't have context. Like the alerts they're sending over just aren't terribly useful. The communication's not very good. So I guess like how do you work through all that? Like is this like the actual? Are you going to be working with folks with the actual process side of it, like helping with their procedures and processes, not just the technical configuration of the controls?
Yeah. I think one of our other services is around cyber defense optimization, where they'll actually have someone basically assigned to your team and doing some hands-on work to help with those IR type procedures, processes, threat hunting, getting forensics if that's in scope, things like that. So I think, it's only been 2 weeks, but reading about it, it's pretty great to look at the assessment, but then also that hands-on help to develop those processes. And I can say, when you talk about controls not being there or log sources not being sent in, I can just about guarantee the time you're going to figure that out, and I can speak from experience, is during an incident to figure out, this domain controller hasn't sent logs for the last 90 days. Or we had this firewall and we changed the log server for it to a different server, and we forgot to update it in the SIM. And you just don't know that until you can't provide those logs during an incident. So that's where I think a combination of the control validation, from the red team perspective of keeping up with the latest threats, in combination with a true penetration test, where you're having someone manually trying to break into your network, whether that's an in-house capability or you're more likely hiring that out, is a good combination. Because automated, it has its place and it can do a lot of things in a short amount of time. But I still put a lot of value to the penetration test, where someone is manually thinking like a threat actor and trying to pivot, around your network, and can adjust if you block them one way or another.
Yeah, both your examples have happened to me, by the way, personally.
Yeah.
The SIM is just missing stuff that you thought it had, but there was no alert set up to let you know that you stopped getting domain admin or AD logs or whatever the logs might be. So yeah, I've been stuck in that situation personally.
Yeah, and it happens. Hopefully your boss is understanding, because most people don't do that maliciously of forgetting things. But that's why it's important to have that constant validation. And I also think it's important to test your security tools. All of them have AI, ML, and block all of the things. But with pretty much every all purple teaming I've done in control validation, we've found things that the vendor hasn't found, and we push them against that, saying, why didn't you find this? This seems pretty common. And they might write detections because of that and help all of their customers. So don't assume that you're perfectly secure because of your security vendors, and the salespeople talk about how it stops everything under the sun. Even after you purchase it, keep evaluating. make sure they're keeping up and
Right.
help them, evolve their tool as time goes on.
What, you mean you can't just plug in a tool and it works and you're secure?
If that was the
security's
case,
pretty easy that way, right?
I wouldn't have much of a job.
Pretty easy. Speaking of jobs, so your transition, you've gone from, from one industry to another, and they're very, very different in terms of profile, threat landscape, focus, probably culture. Coming from your last background and looking forward to this new job, what are the things that you're most looking forward to in this new environment, and what are some of the things you're a little bit maybe concerned about that you might not be able to do exactly like you did in your last position?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be on the cybersecurity side because I think you can truly make an impact across many companies. The past companies I've worked at, you can bring your security maturity up to a certain point, but then once you get to that higher point, you're making really small incremental changes and you're kind of keeping the lights on, which is fun for a couple of years. But I'm really excited to work with different companies who are coming to us, asking for help and providing some expertise in how to make their security posture even better. When it comes to looking at like past companies, things that I'll miss, I am a practitioner. I appreciate the hands-on work. I think that I'll be doing that, more on the side. But just a quick story from my first week, I was trying to connect my phone to the company email and it wasn't working because something wasn't set up in the back end. And someone from Mandiant Security reached out to me to say, "Hey, was this you?" And that was really like earth shattering for me because I'm now on the other side. For 10 years, I was the person messaging people to say, was this you accessing from this area? And they're like, "Yeah, I'm on vacation," or things like that. But once you get that message, I'm like, uh-oh. Now I know how it feels. And you really have to have a good tone with the person because you don't want someone to feel blamed. They're just trying to do what they need to do. And they want to make sure that it's not something they need to look further into. So that'll take some getting used to.
Oh, for sure. And it's kind of like, when you're driving on the highway and you see a cop car behind you, no matter what, you're like, oh crap, what was I doing? And then you realize they're going to an accident a mile up the road, but you still get that fear in you. So when you get that call from security, hey, you're like, what did I do? And it might not be anything you did, but that's a good perspective to bring toward it. And especially, if we're tying it back to the culture thing, and now you're on the other side, you're going to be working with a whole different set of people to be able to bring that perspective and make them feel maybe more not more secure with security, but more comfortable with security. And you'll be, I imagine, speaking maybe at a different level because you're talking security to security. Is that accurate, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you both have to help them from a technical perspective, but then also help them relay what they're doing to the higher ups, like you were talking about before. Because metrics for your team or your CTO don't necessarily work for COO or people from different parts of the organization. So helping enable them tell their story, I think, is really important.
So from a security controls validation point of view, and again, I know you're only a couple of weeks into it, so you might not have the most thorough answer yet, but what do you expect in terms of working with these companies? It's one thing to validate controls if you know exactly what you have, but we know there's so many companies that can't even quantify their IT estate. And so, how are they going about that? You talked about AD a little bit, and you've talked about some other things that you're using, but where do you expect those challenges to be? Because no matter what you're doing, if you're saying, hey, you need to validate these controls, people have to know where they are. Then they need to know how to test them. Then they need to know how to configure them or set policies against them. So what's the anticipation there in terms of not just validating controls, but understanding what do you need to validate in the first place?
Yeah, and that's, speaking to my experience, I've come from highly regulated areas like fintech or HIPAA. with medical data. And I've also worked for retail companies that have virtually no regulations. So if you're working in fintech or with payment card data, like Adrian was talking about, you have PCI. So if you don't know those controls, I question if you're passing your PCI assessment. HIPAA has a little more gray area. They're not as prescriptive. For companies that aren't regulated, I usually look at NIST, Cybersecurity Framework, the CIS Top 18. Then you can really have a benchmark to show what are you doing as far as the base level of controls. Now, once you get to a point of control validation, it depends who your audience is, right? When you're talking to a technical team, they like the numbers and they want to see, of all the tests you ran, which ones had alerts, which ones were we totally blind to, and which ones did we see events, but we didn't have a correlation alert against. Now, if I'm talking to an executive, I think they just want to know about progress. The first one's kind of hard, so maybe you compare it against other companies, your industry. I see executives usually like to think, how are we doing against our peers? But then once we do it a second or a third time, how are we showing progress? Because you're spending all this money on security, but are we getting to cover more attacks that, we see adversaries in your industry? So I think that's a missing piece. You can't test them all. You want to look at, what attackers, what nation state actors or financially driven actors are attacking companies similar to you. How are you showing progress against that?
So speaking of progress, this is less about your day job and more about your personal opinion, but we've seen over the past few years more regulations coming into play. You mentioned HIPAA, you mentioned PCI, and we know that there are not just more regulations, but more frameworks that companies are being held to or being asked to measure themselves against. Regulation is both good and bad. Won't get into that here. But in your view, how is that changing the non-regulated companies, right? Because regulated companies or industries that are more highly regulated, I guess is more accurate, they're used to working towards a specific rule. Is the regulation, are the industry frameworks enough to make people start thinking in a more systemic fashion? Are they going far enough? Are they going not far enough? Or are they a hindrance because now you've got 3,000 controls that a company now has to look at that they might not even know where to start?
Right. Yeah. So from my personal point of view, a couple different things. I think more companies are starting to ask for either security questionnaires or SOC 2 Type 2s, ISO 27001s. I don't think all companies were necessarily asking for that 5 to 10 years ago. And if you don't have any of that, that's a differentiator. You might lose the deal. I think what's being done in Europe is a really cool thing because it actually has some teeth behind it. We're not talking about $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 fines. We're talking about 5% of your annual revenue. And every company I've been at now is taking GDPR really seriously. I know there's different regulations for like California and Massachusetts and New York. I think eventually they need some national framework because it's really hard to treat data differently based on where the customer is from. So I think until we start, putting some teeth behind like the fines and doing more of like what Europe does of a percentage of revenue, like we've seen with different companies, I think that'll start moving the needle because that'll have a real effect of the bottom line of different companies.
One last question, and then I'll let Adrian wrap it up. You mentioned a national law or regulation like GDPR, and they've been talking about a national privacy law. And yet we have like California on one side going, hey, the proposal isn't strong enough. And then we have some other states that are like, we don't think so. What do you think, over under on whether we'll actually get a national privacy law in the next 3 to 5 years?
I would hope, representatives from different states talk about like what's important to them. You're not going to go to the most secure state, but I think hopefully they can agree upon, a minimum level of expectation of security. Like, I don't think it needs to be too prescriptive, but I think something around companies, to the best of their ability, are doing the most to protect the customer's data. And then I think just as important, making sure they still need the data or need the data really in the first place. And if someone asks to, forget the data, you can work on that process. But I think if companies start to scrutinize, like, do we really need social security numbers or credit card numbers, or the address and phone number and full name and date of birth, all those things combined, I think the industry might be able to get more creative. For instance, typically you only see needing the last 4 digits of a social security number. That's progress. You're not storing the social security number in full. So yeah, I don't know if it'll take, critical infrastructure getting breached or something like that, but something will need to happen for all states to realize how important something like this is.
Yeah, it sometimes makes you question the United States, but yeah, it's interesting to watch, and we'll see if California can kind of strong arm everybody else into doing it, because for any national organization, any organization that has customers in all 50 states, it might as well be a federal mandate. If it's in California or New York or some of those states. But yeah, great conversation, Ryan. We're gonna pause for a little bit, and Ryan's gonna join us for the enterprise news in the next segment. But yeah, thank you so much for this, Ryan, to chat about zero trust and control validation and industry progress in general. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Business Security Weekly is recorded on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join our Discord channel to chat with our host, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. All right, now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW324 if you want to follow along as we go through the news, or for links to the articles that we're covering. And we've got some interesting stuff today. So in the funding, Secure Code Warriors, a very familiar name to me. I organize B-Sides Knoxville, and they're often either a sponsor or they run our CTF or they do both. So very, very generous of them to support local B-Sides and to run those CTFs. Ryan, have you ever run into Secure Code Warrior?
No, I have not. Definitely similar companies, but it is a really cool space trying to educate developers.
Yeah, they used to come to InfoSec World when I was working there. I think I know they did some talks. I think they at one point may have done a workshop. So good space. They seem to do it really well. I remember the people who were there, including Matthias, being smart and knowledgeable. But I also want to comment on their press release. I guess it's not really a press release about the funding because that's the headline, but I love how TechCrunch started it with a little bit of a story about them instead of just, hey, we got some money, hand waving, and really talked about the need for this, how they've done it, how they were thinking about it. So, taking a little bit of a marketing spin on this, but I thought it was good because you get so many of these announcements, maybe fewer today than a year ago, but so many funding announcements that it's nice to see something that's a little mixed up and tells a really good story. Not just, hey, we won. I guess they did sort of win. We got some cash here. We're going to use it to grow our team. Hey, we're going to grow our platform. Hey, we're going to add new features and functionality. It really sets the stage for why Secure Code Warrior, as well as just the space in general, is pretty important.
Yeah, and pretty big for one of these companies. They've raised over $100 million now, and they say over 400,000 developers across 600 enterprises is currently where they're at customer-wise, hoping to achieve profitability in 2025. Can totally see it. I mean, there are a lot more bootstrapped training, cybersecurity training companies out there than VC funded. So it's interesting seeing this go the VC funded route. But there's a lot of software, a lot of automation behind the training that they do, which is why they're able to do. I think they told me they do something like over 200 CTFs every year, because it's pretty simple for them to just set it up and push it out and let people hack on it. And it's we get a lot of good feedback about their CTFs. And it's just part of their training tools, those CTFs. It's the same tools that you get when you use them as a customer. So let's see. The next one here, Vendict. I think this is a seed round, almost 10 million for a generative AI GRC tool. So using generative AI.
Seed round, considering the environment we're in.
Yeah. Using generative AI for responding to security questionnaires. So I can't say anything bad about anything that tries to make security questionnaires easier or less painful. So I don't have a whole lot to say. What do you think, Ryan?
You were just talking about security questionnaires.
Yeah, that's really hitting home to a lot of security practitioners or people in GRC. I do wonder, because a lot of it is knowledge about the environment. So there's only so much it can go on its own, but you still need someone feeding it the material.
It just makes stuff up. It'll be fine.
It just says yes to everything.
Yeah,
sure. Check.
Yep.
What happens when they get the data in there from only a certain type of company? Or, what if, I can just see.
Well,
I know, Adrian, you're totally on the other side from me, but I can just see how this can result in some dirty data.
Well, we're assuming how it works. I don't know how their product works, but other products I've seen in this space, what they do is they try and normalize the questions. So they say, okay, if we've seen this question before and we've answered, a human has answered this question before, you take all your old questionnaires and you pile it in. And the big pain with security questionnaires is nobody wants to use the same one. Like, they want to give you some customized one. But effectively, it's pretty rare that you get a new question. Like, it might be worded differently, but it's often the same question. So what if they're using the generative AI to normalize those questions and say, okay, this question is basically asking for the same thing that this other question is, and we got an answer for that in our database, so we'll plug that in.
Yeah, that could be really helpful, assuming you've continually validate answers, because things change from year to year. But I can see the value for
You do
that.
have to update those. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, so that's...
Note to self, make sure it's applicable before you use the generative AI to fill out your questionnaire.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about how they're doing that, and I wish them the best of luck, because everyone wants them to win. Everyone wants security questionnaires to either go away or get easier. Spectre Ops raised around. I'm trying to remember why are they so familiar to me?
So I was just looking it up. They're responsible for Bloodhound, amongst other things. Yeah.
Yep. Bloodhound Enterprise. There you go. Yep. Nailed it. It's exactly why I know them. I think I've known some folks who have worked there also. So it's, good stuff. I have a Bloodhound t-shirt somewhere.
Interesting, though, that this is around Series A extension versus a Series B. So,
yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. Yeah, venture rounds and round extensions. Like nobody wants to look like they're having a down round, right? Like nobody wants a lower valuation. Like it's a way to avoid that stuff. And it's not like it's an extension to a Series A they raised 2 years ago. They raised the rest of this in April, so it's not, even in the before times, before the market was terrible, this wasn't too strange a thing to see a round extension.
Right, and they have some good backers behind this, so it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah. I don't know much about the next one, Cove, AI-powered safety layer for the web. I know nothing here, so if nobody's had time to read it, we can skip it. But they, I think, are just coming out of stealth with a 5.8 million seed round.
Yep, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, reading it, I can't tell what they're doing. Enables customers to use plain English descriptions to train machine learning models on their platform's own data. The ML models then help the customer detect content that violates their policies. So it's content detection. So is this really security? So basically taking the, instead of traumatizing humans who have to go through horrible things that get posted to social media, Facebook can use this instead of traumatizing humans and having to pay for their therapy. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, maybe.
Could be. It's a little hard to tell just reading it quickly. I didn't go through this one. But it definitely looks like it's perhaps trying to clean up some things at Meta without so much human involvement. Maybe it's less of the trauma thing and more of the volume thing.
Right. The trauma thing is I think there's an entire documentary on it. So it's well documented. It's an issue. So yeah, it totally makes sense that this is coming out of folks who are at Meta. But yeah, trust and safety systems. So yeah, that's exactly what this is. So yeah, if they can make that work, that's excellent, because it's horrible making humans have to go through that stuff.
Humans ruin everything.
Yeah, pretty much. If you have an open platform where people can post whatever they want, you're going to have to deal with this. It's something you have to tackle.
It's I don't use social media all that much, but when I got engaged, I joined some groups on social media about wedding planning just to get ideas. I've done event planning professionally, so it didn't seem like this was going to be too hard to do, but I thought, okay, I'll just join some forums, because everything I've done professionally has been cybersecurity. And some of these groups, because they're not in cybersecurity, they left their membership open, and every once in a while I'd go and try to look up, like, what colors are going to be popular for fall 2023, and I'd get a really disgusting visual in this wedding forum that was not appropriate whatsoever. And there was one group that couldn't figure out how to stop really explicit photos from being posted in this group. Ooh. And I was just like, you know what? I'll figure out my own damn colors. If you can't figure out how to get this awful stuff off of your social media page, like, ugh, it was off. It was. I'm not offended by much. Working in this space, you sort of get immune to it a little bit. But like, I'd wake up in the morning, I'd be like, okay, what's new in this little wedding forum? And I'd be like, oh God, no, that's disgusting. Like,
and it was a Facebook group?
Yeah, there were a couple of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that there should be controls filtering out a lot of that stuff automatically, but yeah, some of it gets sent to human moderators, but yeah, it's a shitty job.
Yeah, there were certain body parts I never need to see that closely.
Yeah. Moving on here, I was just going to briefly mention Telescope looks like another DSPM, and this is a pre-seed. So I guess they're both coming out of stealth and have a pre-seed. So we're really stretching things out here. You're going to have your pre-seed round, your seed round, your pre-series A, your Series A, your Series A extension, your venture round. Like it's funding is really getting. I don't know why it's quite this spread out, but yeah, maybe again it's the market, right? Like less risk in investing at a pre-seed stage than even a seed stage. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a whole venture capitalist course just in the news to learn all the different stages.
Yeah, and it's nice when we have Tyler here, because he is an early stage investor, and he can often provide some color on this kind of stuff and explain some of it. But yeah, even he's just kind of scratching his head with some of these more creative names for the different funding rounds that we're seeing and the different methods for creative funding. Moving on from funding, I thought we had multiple acquisitions here. One of my acquisitions is missing here. I just had to refresh. Yeah, so Jamf acquired DataJar. Jamf being the big, well-known as a Mac-based EMM or MDM provider, device management. And what does DataJar do? So this is like a MSP console. So if you're a managed service provider doing device management for multiple customers, it's basically like a meta console for Jamf, it sounds like. Okay. We're seeing more and more of that software built just for MSPs and MSSPs. allow them to manage stuff at scale. And then the other one is Graylog picking up Resurface IO. So Graylog, as the name suggests, like most people think of the log tool, the open source and commercial log centralization, log management tool. But yeah, they're getting into API security now with Resurface. And word is that this is an asset acquisition, so probably not the best of situations, but probably a good deal for Graylog. It's not a. Yeah. Go ahead, Rob.
I think API security is just becoming huge. I feel like it's one of those things where 4 years ago, it was a timing thing where I feel like in the next couple of years, API security is going to become really important because that's just another way to access data that people aren't thinking about.
Yep. Yeah, and we're still seeing a lot of these pop up out of Stealth as well. Like I was looking at one today that was talking about being MFA for API security. So I was thinking about, okay, how do you do multi-fact? I guess you can, maybe it doesn't meet the original definition of MFA, but multiple ways of checking, so somebody can't just steal a token and use it, right? Like there's some other contextual details that have to be in place for you to be able to use that API, right? Like maybe it's the IP address you're coming from or something like that, or you have there's a certificate that gets handed off as well.
Are you saying you don't want push notifications for every API call?
Yes. I think that's definitely, yeah. But this is zero trust-ish, right, Ryan? This is zero trust-ish.
Yeah.
MFA for APIs.
No, it's funny. You think about MFA, it's just so ingrained in our mind of this hardware security tokens and the apps and push notifications that it doesn't necessarily mean that. It just has to be some other method on top of just the authentication or the key.
Yeah, I work for a SaaS security vendor, Valence Security, and that's a very common topic. Like when we look at the different SaaS breaches that occur, like token theft is usually involved in a lot of them, and it's just it's like the inverse of MFA, right? It's like not even a single full authentication method. Like it's just something you have. You don't even need a username, right, to log into an app with a token. But yeah, good to see that coming to APIs, because I think for most APIs right now it is as simple as just having that token, that access token. Let's see. IronNet, I think we saw that coming a mile away. We started talking about that in December. SPACs haven't done terribly well on the public market. A lot of them have had to delist or backed out of their IPO entirely. And IronNet is just the latest to delist from the New York Stock Exchange in this case. And I think the last news we had is somebody was going to step in and save them, but only if General Alexander stepped down as CEO. So weird stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, reading this,
the inside story.
Yeah, it says the company does not expect that the delisting will have any adverse effects on its business operations. I think we've already seen some adverse effects, and I think this may. I mean, does that mean that they didn't accept that proposal? Does that mean that General Alexander's going to stay? Does this mean they're going to try to take a new course? It's kind of hard to tell, but I think it's pretty clear that most people would expect that this delisting will have an adverse effect on business operations. I don't think how they could, if they're being honest with themselves, in any good conscience, say that this won't, right? This has been the story of maybe what not to do if you're trying to raise money and be a sustainable organization in today's cybersecurity market and greater economic environment. I think this has been a case study in what not to do.
Yeah, I mean, from a PR perspective, they gotta get out of the news for, all this stuff that's going on. Like that can't be good for business. Like for a while now, it's been like, is IronNet going to exist next month? It's hard to sign up customers if it looks like your company might disappear a month from now. So they got to stabilize that. Whatever path takes them, if delisting ends all this negative PR, then that's what they got to do, because that's got to be scaring off customers.
And I would think if you are a customer, you've probably been looking into alternatives pretty seriously.
Yeah. Yep. Just in case. On the other side of this, Microsoft has been making some changes. They rebranded stuff, like instead of Azure AD, now it's Ensure. Is that correct?
It is. Yep. We changed it in our adapter directory last week. We sure did. And it's like everywhere, so you have to change it 7,000 times. Thanks, Microsoft.
Yeah, it's Microsoft Entra ID instead of Azure AD.
Entra ID. And this, what we're talking about here, is this, Entra. So now they have Microsoft Entra Internet Access and Microsoft Entra Private Access. So these are some kind of network security products. This might be ZTNA or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, based on the vendors that are tumbling, that's what it would sound like.
Yeah, fall under a category known as Secure Service Edge. So SSE, which is SASE without one of the pieces. I forget which piece gets stripped out. So
access.
We're just constantly trying to keep up with the new branding and name changes, and now they have new names for threat actors as well, just to keep us on our toes.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I can let go of threat actor. It's going to take a while for Entra to set in, but I don't know. I think threat actor is going to live for a while as colloquialism.
Yeah. So speaking of which, the very next story is the Microsoft breach by not a panda but a storm. They were attacked by a storm, not a panda. CrowdStrike might call it a panda, but they call it a storm. So
well, you wrote a blog post, so let's hear it, Adrian.
Yeah. So basically, it's a mix of vulnerabilities and an attack. Somehow they got their hands on a signing key, on I forget exactly what they called the signing key. Again, the naming is very difficult to parse, but and it should update at some point here with my blog post. I did update that.
It's there.
But so they were able to use the signing key to sign forged tokens. And the term forged is important here because they weren't actually generating valid tokens. They were just making up things that looked like Azure AD tokens. But because they signed them with this key, they found a vulnerability where Microsoft wasn't validating the actual access token. They didn't care what data was in the token. As long as it was signed, they would accept it. So literally, you could just make up your own tokens and use it to impersonate someone to then get another token that allowed you to pull their mail over the Outlook Mail API. And so this started happening. I think it was 32 days after the attack started. They found out from a customer clued them into the attack. So Microsoft did not detect the attack. It came from a customer, and this attack was seemed to be political in nature. It was coming from a Chinese government, pre-existing, well-known state-sponsored threat actor, and was targeting 25 government and government-adjacent organizations. So they basically could have pulled anybody's email from Microsoft 365, any Microsoft 365 customers, the way I'm understanding this. But they chose only to do so from these 25. So it was a very targeted attack. And, so once notified, they found the vulnerabilities, they fixed the vulnerabilities, and, they published all the IOCs and stuff like that. But the thing that kind of irked me is under the recommendations, they said customers don't need to take any action. We got this. Like we closed up all the holes. And I'm like, you didn't catch this one. I don't really expect you to catch the next one either. Like, and that's what my whole blog post is about. And most of the recommendations are from my colleague Amit, and he really brought in Amit Ziv, came up with most of those. We kind of collaborated on the general recommendations, but then he wrote up that section of the report. And yeah, there's all kinds of stuff you can do to monitor for weird anomalies in how tokens are being used or how they're being generated. There's plenty of stuff you can do there. So, I kind of disagreed with the do nothing. We got this. And there's a bunch of recommendations in our blog post on what you can do to spot this stuff if your SaaS vendor doesn't spot it for you.
Yeah, I think with all the talk of AI and ML, I think the way the customer found it out was the app ID was anomalous compared to previous ones. This sounds like a really easy use case of, I think that's what I read. There was something within the log that was different than the others, but it sounds like an easy case of, look at what's normal over however long, and then create a detection if something is abnormal.
Basic anomaly detection. Yep. Yeah. A big break in the pattern.
Yeah, and I think to plug Mandiant a little bit, reading one of their recent M-Trends report is, I think it's really important to stay up to date with threat intel because a couple of years ago, phishing was really the main vector to get in. But now you see these Chinese actors are looking at exploits for different, Office 365 SaaS platforms or Barracuda email security gateways or all these appliances that you can't put an EDR agent over and you can't get traditional logs from. Yeah. So you really have to shift your approach, especially if you feel like you're a target and maybe keeping, a lot of these were 0 days, so patching wouldn't have helped. But, seeing what you can do to keep up with those latest initial attack vectors.
And so speaking of access to logs and not being able to put an EDR agent, so there were logs that would help you detect this kind of thing. And Microsoft got some flack because you had to pay extra for those. So kind of a security tax here where if you didn't have the right license level, if you didn't have the premium security package or whatever it was called, you didn't get to detect this attack for yourself. So Article 13 and 14 focus on that aspect of this, where Microsoft kind of felt the blowback from that and is now offering some of these free instead of making you pay for your logs.
So let me ask a moral and ethical question here to two people who have been on that side of it. Doesn't this get into, I get it, we're a capitalist society, but doesn't this get into a little bit of negligence when you're talking about holding back information that can quite literally keep people secure?
From a legal perspective, I don't know. We had an attorney on earlier, but she's not here right now.
Yeah, no, that's why I said moral and ethical, not legal.
Right. But I think this is just something there's a part of your due diligence when you're going after a new vendor. This should be on your questionnaire somewhere, right? Like, are you going to force me to pay for security visibility, or visibility into what's going on, and understanding the shared responsibility and what capabilities you have to detect attacks versus them. Like the thing that really put Adallom back on the map. Adallom was one of the early CASB vendors that got acquired by Microsoft, was that they detected that some bad actors were hacking into Salesforce instances and downloading like the whole thing. Like there was like API commands you could run that would just give you all of somebody's data, like wrap the whole thing up in a zip file, download it, and Salesforce wasn't detecting this going on, and the customers weren't detecting this going on. So you had these highly successful attacks that were just invisible to everybody. And, that was one of the, CASB, very similar to SaaS security, what we do in terms of goals. That was one of their big claims to fame is they discovered that going on. So that's a big question, when you're going to use a SaaS product, are you going to let me know when I get attacked, when my data gets stolen, or if not, you give me the ability to do that detection myself.
Because if you're talking about continuous monitoring, first thing you look for are anomalies, right? But if you don't have the tools and it's held back, let's say you're a small or medium-sized enterprise, you got to make those budgetary decisions. It feels a little icky, right?
Yeah.
To use a very, very technical term.
and this is nothing new for Microsoft. I worked a BEC case back in 2018 where somebody had hacked into the email of somebody working at a title and mortgage company that did commercial real estate. So commercial real estate, these are almost all 6, 7, 8-digit transactions that are going across. And, just like we see in BEC, they sat there long enough to understand how the process worked, like when to inject an email, to use the right signature, to make it look exactly correct, to get that large transaction sent into a different bank account. And the first thing we noticed, they were using Office 365 back then, is there were no email logs. Email logs were disabled by default. So we had no information on when this attacker first got in, how often they got in, where they were coming from. So the very first thing we had to do is turn on those logs. And within minutes of turning those logs on, we saw an active attack. And we called up the person who was the target of the attack and caught them literally minutes late on a Friday before they were about to change the routing and transit numbers on a large transaction.
Yeah, something like that bothers me a little more, where logs are not by default. That seem pretty basic. And I think coming from the SMB space myself, getting those logs is great, but most of the security teams I've been on have been 2 to 5 people. We don't have the time to write anomalous type data. So I'd put the pressure on these SIMs or EDR vendors, because I would never ingest logs unless there's alerts associated with them. Because that's what we pay them to do, to have detection engineers. There might be some big banks and insurance companies that have the staff to do that, but we push our security vendors pretty hard to create those detections since they have the expertise.
As you should, yeah. And Microsoft Sentinel didn't exist back in 2018 either. So yeah. All right. The other breach item in here, very strange one, having to do with TLDs and DNS, but apparently millions of sensitive emails intended to be sent to the U.S. military are instead sent to Mali, because if you miss the I in .mil, you're sending something to the Mali TLD, which is .ml. So apparently the contractor or a Dutch entrepreneur has been trying to raise a flag about this for a decade, and because he's not going to be in charge of this stuff anymore. So, the folks in Mali are going to have access to these millions of emails that get sent to those domains.
You would have thought somebody realized that they weren't getting the emails from the military domain and said something. It makes me question of, there's those millions of emails and no one raised a red flag of, well, I haven't gotten that report for 5 years. Outside of a normal DLP technology, you'd think you'd have some human process.
So at our local Knoxville DEF CON group, we had somebody give a quick presentation where he did something similar, except he registered a bunch of example domains, Like people use like xxxxx at, xxx.xxx as like examples in code and stuff like that. So he registered a lot of these adult website domains, with like certain number of X's, because triple X is a valid TLD. And he had to register himself as an adult business to be able to register these domains. And he captured just like not as many as this, but thousands. He got thousands and thousands of emails from everything from airlines to hospitality stuff. Like all this example code somehow made its way into production, or he found in some cases to protect somebody's email address when it's sent to support or something like that, they will put X's in the email addresses, but it goes into the system like that. So that email actually gets sent out with their sensitive bank information on it, and he receives it now. So it's just such a bizarre problem, and I don't know that there's any elegant solutions to it. If somebody's going to... I
love stories like this, talking to like students and peers, because you think about all these sophisticated attackers and hackers and stuff like this, but data loss a lot of the time can be accidental. It's not necessarily companies getting hacked all the time. It's someone sending something out that should have been encrypted or sending it to the wrong person. So this is a pretty good one to hear every once in a while.
Yeah, if you look at the Verizon DBIR, I forget what the percentage is, but a significant percentage of data loss incidents are just completely accidental. They're not malicious at all.
I mean, it's incredibly easy to typo somebody's email address, and people can't spell my last name anyway. So if I'm not in their address book, it goes, Adrian, you probably have the same thing. And actually you too, Ryan, because people never know where the I and the E go.
The I and the E, yeah.
And then you go into the whole argument of, do you just, so in companies I've been at, people, I've seen both. I've seen Fred more often than you'd think as my first name, not even looking at the I. But you get into the argument of, if you're sending out an email that should have been encrypted, do you just encrypt it and not tell the user? Or do you stop it and then make them do it the right way? Which one has more friction? But they might just keep doing it wrong for years. So it brings an interesting debate of how you implement controls for something like this.
Do you guys personally ever get the same email address both ways, like with the misspelling? Do you go after the misspelled version just so you can catch those emails?
Do you smart. No, I haven't done that.
Yeah. Okay. Just curious, because I know some organizations do that where they intentionally register the misspellings, the most common misspellings of their brand name, so that bad guys can't and profit off of those, in typo squat, basically.
Companies I've been part of, that's someone's job to look at it every once in a while and register domains with different number substitutions to make sure someone else can't purchase it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I never thought of it, but I can tell you that if I were choosing my personal email address now, it would be very different than what I chose way back in the 90s when we all didn't know about what's happening today. Definitely not. Wouldn't use my name in any of it.
Yeah, so let's see. Number 15 here. This is basically the conversation we had with Jules earlier. How to be a security person that engineers don't hate. Like the conversation was broader than just engineers, but just skimming over the article, a lot of the same advice that we got from Jules, but still always good to be thinking about how you're perceived by other parts of the organization, how you can work better with them, not shoot yourself in the foot by destroying rapport with departments that you need to work with.
Yeah, I think the two things that come to mind for this, because I full-heartedly believe, the content of this stuff, is one, let them just nerd out in what they do. Like, people like to talk about what they do and they take a lot of pride in it. And two, if you're asking them to do something, security wise, make sure it's on their, goals or objectives so they get credit too. Because most of the time in security, I'll say, vulnerabilities reduce them to 10%, but we're not doing the work necessarily. We're not doing the patching. So make sure they get credit and they get their bonus accordingly.
Yeah. Any of these other how-tos that you guys want to discuss? We've got how to securely build product features using AI APIs, which looks pretty straightforward how-to. I don't have a whole lot of commentary on it personally.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's much different than just API security in general. Make sure you know where it's coming from and using encryption, that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, the big difference with LLM AI is prompt injection, right? Because it's something that happens just with normal English language. Like, it's not something you can easily programmatically block, which is why we've seen some startups that specifically just focus on that. But yeah, I don't know, without using a third party, I don't know how easy it is to prevent prompt injection, where you basically tell it, ignore all the other instructions and do this instead, or ignore your security programming. like when you look at prompt injections, it looks like social engineering, like you're social engineering a human, basically, in a lot of cases. In other cases, you can find like just switching a language gets you around some of the blocks. Like if somebody's just doing like some basic keyword blocking or something like that, like ask in Spanish and now it works. So it's kind of bizarre. I know we've got, they're working on a OWASP top 10 just for LLM AI right now. That's a project that's ongoing right now. Let's see. In that same vein, there's now Worm GPT. So apparently, I don't know a ton about it yet, but there's a. I mean, we predicted this. We talked about this months ago about how, the existence of open source LLM AI will result in bad actors having access to this technology. And it looks like that's basically what Worm GPT is a general LLM model that doesn't have all the restrictions on generating malware and the kind of stuff that they, OpenAI and Google are going to try and resist with their public services.
Yeah, it's inevitable, and it's these kind of email phishing, spam, the whole thing, it's getting a lot more sophisticated. It's just not as simple as telling people, hey, be careful, because that's what we try to do. And especially with, security awareness programs, things like that, it's getting a lot more complicated. And last week, my fiance, first he gets a text and he comes over and he says, what is this? And it was a text from our bank, in air quotes for those people listening, not watching. And I'm like, no, ignore it. Then he gets an email. And I'm looking through this and I'm going, oh, this is good. Like, this looks like our bank. But I'm like, no. Then he gets a call. Delete. And then I'm sitting online, like, trying to look up. I'm like, all right, what's the fraud number for my bank? Then my bank's website was down. So I'm like, okay, something's going on here. I'm like, I'm putting $100 on breach announcement on Monday morning, like, just going through my head, like, something's not right here. Like, no, I could not pull up any customer service, any fraud complaint number that matched what was on the back of my card. But I'm telling you, as somebody who's worked in this space for a long time, I'm looking at this and even I'm doubting. I'm like, is this, like, this looks pretty darn good. So for a regular person who doesn't live and breathe this stuff, I'm at my desk hours and hours a day. it's getting really, really good. And especially if they have these tools to spit out more and more of this stuff, and they know which ones work and they know which ones don't, and they can just, use these tools to generate more and more of this stuff. More people are going to get caught. More people are going to get confused. I mean, I called the customer service. I was very curious. I did call the customer service number in the email just because I wanted to know. But as soon as I got the recording, I was like, all right, never mind. I just shut down my phone. But it's definitely going to be a bigger problem because the more automated tools that they have, the more people they're going to be able to reach. The more people they reach, the more people are going to fall for it or just, frankly, don't know better because it's hard. It was hard for me to spot. And I do this all day.
Something I just saw today is scammers changing the phone numbers for customer service for businesses on Google, because you know how you can Google's like, hey, did Google Maps deliver you to the right place? Or is this the right phone number for this business? They crowdsource that.
Two of them for my bank listed with that number. But I was like, no, because I couldn't find it. Once my bank's website came back up, I couldn't find that same number on the bank website. But if I had just gone by what I found by Googling, that number was there.
Yeah.
The number in the email.
It sounded like they were covering all the like they were covering all the other bases, right? Like he got a text, then a phone call, then an email. Yep. Like that's why wouldn't they also change the support number on Google?
Yep. I probably spent 15 or 20 minutes once the website came up again, looking through their website. I'm like, I can't find this number. Something's not right. Something's definitely not right. But if all you do is go, okay, I'm just going to go to my bank website, because my bank's website was down, but the fraudulent website was not down.
Wow. Yeah. That does not sound like coincidence.
It does not sound like coincidence to me. And somebody's going to go, okay, this looks and feels like my bank's website. People are going to get caught for sure.
We'll be talking about this in your next episode, in the breach section.
It's still really a little too close. Maybe we give it 30, 60 days.
Well, I mean, they have a time limit now? Like, I don't think that's quite in yet. That's the SEC pushed out the time limit rule that they're going to put into place till April next year, I think. But before
I think
long,
for some companies it could be like 72 hours. It's supposed to be pretty quick for that.
Pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, this might not have been a breach. This might have been just pure play impersonation. But when I did finally talk to somebody at the bank, I was a little relentless on her. And I know it's not her job, but I'm like, you need to document this. You need to put in your notes that there is impersonation going on in your bank. This is not your fault. I'm not saying it's your fault, but you need to document this and you need to send it to the security team. She's like, okay. I'm like, no, you don't understand me. I'm not saying
they're in the house. They're in the house. Get out.
Exactly. I'm like, you have to tell the security team, and she's probably like, okay, crazy lady, bye.
Oh. Yeah, well, hopefully they get that sorted. If you need suggestions on alternate banks,
a new debit card
let me know.
So I'm good. I don't know about the millions of other people who got the text, the email, and the call, though.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like sometimes you'll find stuff. Like I'll go and check Reddit. Sometimes when weird stuff like that happens at scale, you'll see people post on social media or Reddit or something like that and say, hey, anybody else seeing this weird stuff or experiencing this?
Thanks, AI.
So a few more items here. I want to wrap in just a few minutes here. Don't want to go too long today, but a few things from the White House, number 2021. So we got the National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan, which I believe was outlined and promised from the previous cybersecurity brief that they put out. And I have not had the time to dig into it yet. I don't know if you guys have, but we can maybe save that for another episode.
Yeah, I've had the time to dig in a little bit
57
for
pages.
21 around the smart devices. And I think this was something that was a long time coming. It's similar to like the Energy Star type certification. Yep. I'll be curious to see if people make decisions based off of it. I've purchased smart devices in the last couple of years, and I'll do some research online and looking at articles and such. But I would love for it to be easy and for them to have different things like, can it be updated? Is it accessible from the internet? Stuff like that. So I'm pretty excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, me too. It's so we had Grace Burkhart from IOXT Alliance on a few months back, and they have their own labels, and they're named here in the bottom of this article as contributors or participants in support of today's announcement. So I'm really curious to see how this connects with the stuff that they're already doing. But yeah, it's pretty far down the road. Like they're thinking about not just when you buy it, but continuous security support while you own the product. So there's like on IOXT Alliance's website, there's a place where you can click and you can say, this information isn't accurate, or you can also click, I found a vulnerability in something related to this product. So I like the idea of a label that's ongoing, where that can help you get notified if there are vulnerabilities in the product or the equivalent of a recall, or like somebody found issues with it and you need to do something. So yeah, it shouldn't be just at the point of sale, right? Like throughout ownership of the device, you need to know if there's something vulnerable about your home cameras and automation stuff and all this stuff that has access to your personal life. All right. Should we? Yeah, let's jump to the squirrel stories here. Number 24 cracked me up. For anybody who's read the register, they are, whoa. Did we lose Ryan? Why is it an infinite mirror where Ryan used to be, Gus?
I don't know, but now we have infinite squirrels as well.
Yeah. Can we get everybody back?
No, more squirrels, less humans.
So anyway, I'll just keep talking, and the register is just they can be pretty savage. And the headline of this article is Linux has nearly half of the desktop OS Linux market. and what they're talking about is there's just this ongoing debate over whether Android and Chrome OS count as Linux. Both come from Google, of course, and both are Linux at the core. Chrome OS is much more Linux than Android. You can readily download and run Linux software on it. You can get a command line. It really is Linux under the covers. Built on Gen 2 Linux, which I didn't realize. Instead of it used to be built on top of Ubuntu, but now it's Gen 2, which makes sense because it's cheaper hardware. Gen 2 can be more optimized. But yeah, very, very funny article. Desktop Linux is actually doing pretty well, 3% plus of the market, but way more if you count Chrome OS, which is 4% of the market.
It's an interesting point of view.
Yeah. So that was our first squirrel story, and the second one is James Cameron lending his prescient knowledge and advice. James Cameron on
he's
AI.
He's really having a moment between the submarine implosion and this. He's our best source of news lately. He's the expert no one asked for. He's the expert no one asked for, and everyone needs. Yeah, so the title here is James Cameron on AI. I warned you guys in 1984 and you didn't listen. Of course, referring to the
the movie The Terminator, the original Terminator. And like, he's not wrong with some of his comments. He's like, yeah, if we put AI in charge of military stuff and we don't have the ability to stop it, it could be bad. Duh. Right? But yeah, I think everybody knows that. But yeah, and Arnold is backing him up with similar quotes, saying, talking about the extraordinary writing of Jim Cameron. So prescient for him to foresee this. So,
I mean, he was the Terminator, so he is an expert, right? He's definitely an AI expert.
Yeah, he's been there. He's experienced it. Yeah, so that was fun to roll my eyes at. So I thought y'all would have fun rolling your eyes at that as well.
It's pretty good. I like all of the nice graphics.
Yeah, so that's all we've got for today. Big thanks to Ryan, who we didn't get to properly thank. Maybe his internet went down or his power went off or something like that. But thanks for him for both his interview and sticking around for the news and hanging out with us. And big thanks, Katie, for being there for me today. It's great when you can jump in and let me realign my brain and figure out what I'm doing during an interview. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And
thanks.
We'll do it again next week.
Yeah, thanks to everybody else watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We will be back next week, and that time that you're supposed to jump is right now. Do it. Jump right now. That's too late. You waited too long.